The grand hall of the Ralgen Empire shone with golden light, its towering pillars engraved with the history of their mighty rule. Alien nobles from across the galaxy stood in elegant robes, their eyes fixed on the center of the chamber. There, on a raised platform, stood Princess Silara, her violet skin glowing under the crystal chandeliers. Her silver eyes were sharp, her presence commanding. It was a historic day. The Galactic Alliance had gathered to discuss a marriage, one that would unite the Ralgen Empire with another species, bringing peace after years of political tension. Many powerful leaders had traveled across the stars for this moment. Every species present hoped that one of their own would be chosen as the princess's consort. Silara raised her chin and spoke, her voice clear and firm. "I will accept a marriage alliance to secure peace, but let it be known, I will marry anyone but a human." A murmur spread through the hall. Some of the nobles nodded in approval, while others exchanged uneasy glances. The humans stood quietly in their corner, their expressions unreadable. Among them was Captain Daniel Reeve, the leader of Earth's diplomatic delegation. He had expected hostility, but the princess's open rejection still stung. The Ralgen Empire had always considered humans to be an inferior species. Unlike the towering, powerful Ralgen warriors or the highly advanced telepathic Yulvari, humans were seen as weak and unpredictable. Many in the Empire believed that humans had no place in high politics, let alone as part of the royal bloodline. An older alien noble stepped forward, his deep blue robe flowing behind him. Chancellor Vekros, one of the key advisors to the Empire, gave Silara a measured look. "Your Highness," he said calmly, "the Alliance Council has decreed that your marriage must be decided through the sacred ritual of selection. It will be a fair process, guided by the wisdom of the ancients." Silara's silver eyes narrowed. She knew about the ritual, but she had assumed it would favor one of the noble alien houses. The selection process was ancient, involving a mix of tradition and technology that calculated the best match for the Empire's future. She was confident that no human could ever be chosen. "Very well," she said with a cold smile. "Let the ritual begin. The outcome will prove that humans are unworthy." A towering machine was brought into the hall, a sacred artifact known as the Celestial Arbiter. It had been used for centuries to select rulers, commanders, and royal consorts. The nobles watched in anticipation as the machine activated, its golden rings spinning with energy. A series of names and symbols flashed on the holographic display, scanning every suitor who had come forward. Silara folded her arms, waiting. The names of the galaxy's most powerful noble houses flickered across the screen. Proud warriors, brilliant scholars, wealthy rulers. She glanced at the humans, expecting them to be ignored entirely. But then the room fell silent. The machine slowed. The glowing rings pulsed with finality. The selected name appeared, Daniel Reeve. For a moment, no one moved. The nobles looked at each other in shock. Silara's breath caught in her throat. Daniel blinked, looking up at the display. "Well," he muttered, breaking the silence. "That's unexpected." Silara's expression darkened. "No," she said sharply. "This must be a mistake." The Celestial Arbiter never made mistakes. The machine was beyond manipulation, beyond corruption. Its judgment was final. The ritual had spoken. Her destined consort was not an alien noble, not a mighty warrior, but a human. Silara clenched her fists. This was impossible, unacceptable. The hall erupted into whispers, and the Chancellor stepped forward once more. "The decision has been made," he declared. "To reject it would dishonor our traditions and weaken our empire's standing within the Alliance." Silara's mind raced. How could this happen? How could a mere human, one of the weakest species in the galaxy, be chosen for the future of the Empire? She looked at Daniel, expecting arrogance or smugness. Instead, he only gave her a calm, unreadable look. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't desperate. He simply stood there, waiting. Silara gritted her teeth. She had sworn she would never marry a human. And yet, fate had just decided otherwise. Princess Silara stormed through the marble halls of the royal palace, her silver eyes burning with fury. The golden banners of the Raljan Empire waved gently from the tall pillars, but she paid them no attention. Behind her, Chancellor Vekros and 2 royal guards struggled to keep up. This is madness. Silara snapped, turning sharply to face the Chancellor. There must be an error. The celestial arbiter has never chosen wrongly before, but this time it must have malfunctioned. Vekros remained calm, his hands folded behind his back. The arbiter does not make mistakes, Your Highness. It has spoken, and the selection is final. Silara clenched her fists. How could a mere human be chosen for her? Daniel Reeve was nothing like the noble warrior she had expected. He was neither the son of a powerful ruler nor a champion of an ancient bloodline. He was ordinary. A soldier, a diplomat, a human. She took a deep breath, trying to control her anger. There must be another way, she said. Another challenge, another test. I will not. Defying the selection would mean defying the Empire's own traditions. Vekros interrupted. If you refuse, the Galactic Alliance will see it as an insult. The peace we have worked so hard for may crumble. Silara's jaw tightened. She knew he was right. The Empire had many enemies, and the peace treaty was fragile. If she rejected the chosen suitor, it could be seen as a refusal to cooperate with the Alliance, leading to political chaos. She took a deep breath. Fine, she said at last. I will meet this human. But make no mistake, I will not accept him so easily. Meanwhile, Daniel Reeve sat in the diplomatic wing of the palace, watching the twin moons of the Raljan homeworld through a glass window. He had spent years negotiating with different alien species, but this was something else entirely. He had never expected to be chosen as a royal consort, especially not for a princess who clearly despised his kind. He had seen the way Silara looked at him, her disgust barely hidden. A voice interrupted his thoughts. Captain Reeve, said a palace attendant. The princess will see you now. Daniel nodded, standing up. He adjusted his uniform and followed the attendant down the long, shimmering halls of the palace. When he entered the chamber, he found Silara sitting on an ornate throne-like chair, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the air was thick. Then Silara broke the silence. You do not belong here, human. Daniel raised an eyebrow. I didn't ask for this, he replied simply. But here we are. Silara narrowed her eyes. I do not trust your kind. Your people are reckless, unpredictable. I will not allow you to stand beside me as my consort. Daniel crossed his arms. That's fine. I'm not looking to force my way into your life. But if you want to challenge the decision, you'll have to find a way that doesn't cause a political disaster. Silara studied him carefully. He wasn't groveling, nor was he trying to impress her. Unlike the other suitors who had bowed and flattered her, this human was standing his ground without arrogance or desperation. It was unexpected. Very well, she said. I will allow you to stay in the palace for now, but do not mistake this for acceptance. I will prove that the arbiter's choice was wrong. Daniel smirked slightly. I'll look forward to seeing what you come up with. Silara turned away, frustrated. This human was different from what she had imagined. He wasn't weak, and he wasn't afraid. For the first time, she wondered if she had underestimated humanity. For the next few days, Daniel Reeve remained in the royal palace, watched closely by guards and noble courtiers. He could feel the silent judgment from the alien aristocrats, their whispers echoing through the grand halls. The Raljan Empire saw humans as lesser beings, and their princess had made her stance clear. She did not want him here. Yet, despite the cold treatment, Daniel remained calm. He had been in worse situations before, and he wasn't the type to back down. Meanwhile, Princess Silara spent hours in the grand chamber, speaking with her advisors. She had to find a way to prove the celestial arbiter had made a mistake. But no matter how much she argued, The answer remained the same. Rejecting Daniel outright would be a political disaster. Her only option was to make him fail. The next morning, Daniel was summoned to the palace's combat arena, a vast training ground where the Empire's greatest warriors honed their skills. The air buzzed with anticipation as dozens of nobles and military officers gathered to watch. Scifi stood in the center of the arena, her arms crossed. "If you are to be my consort, you must prove your worth," she announced. "The Ralgen do not accept the weak." Daniel glanced around. "And how exactly do you want me to prove myself?" She smirked. "A trial of strength. You will fight one of our warriors in single combat." Murmurs spread through the crowd. The Ralgen were towering beings, their bodies built for war. Humans, on the other hand, were smaller and physically weaker. The fight would be humiliating. Exactly what Scifi wanted. Daniel exhaled slowly. He had expected something like this. "All right," he said, rolling his shoulders. "Let's get this over with." A massive warrior stepped forward. Commander Vokran, one of the Empire's finest. His muscles rippled beneath his armor, and his sharp yellow eyes glowed with confidence. "I will not go easy on you, human," Vokran warned. Daniel smirked. "Didn't expect you to." The crowd cheered as the fight began. Vokran charged forward, his speed shocking for a being of his size. Daniel barely dodged in time, rolling to the side as the warrior's massive fist struck the ground, leaving a deep crack in the stone. Scifi watched with narrowed eyes. She expected the fight to be over in seconds. But Daniel didn't fall. Instead, he moved with precision, avoiding Vokran's heavy strikes. He wasn't as strong, but he was faster, more agile. He analyzed his opponent's movements, waiting for an opening. Then it came. Vokran swung wide, too wide. Daniel ducked under his arm, stepped in close, and struck a pressure point near the warrior's ribs. Vokran stumbled, momentarily dazed. Gasps echoed through the arena. Scifi's eyes widened. This wasn't luck. The human was skilled. Vokran roared, in rage. He charged again, but this time Daniel was ready. He sidestepped, grabbed the warrior's arm, and used his momentum to flip him onto the ground. Dust flew into the air as Vokran crashed down. Silence filled the arena. Daniel stepped back, breathing heavily but standing tall. "Still think humans are weak?" he asked. Scifi's hands clenched at her sides. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had wanted to humiliate him, but instead he had surprised everyone, including her. For the first time, she realized something troubling. This human was not going to be easy to break. The palace was buzzing with whispers. Daniel Reeve, the human outsider, had not only survived, but had defeated one of the Ralgen Empire's strongest warriors. The nobles and military officers who had gathered to witness his humiliation were now questioning their assumptions. Princess Scifi, however, was not ready to accept defeat. She sat in the High Council chamber, her silver eyes fixed on the glowing holographic screen before her. Chancellor Vekros and several royal advisors stood nearby, discussing strategies in hushed tones. "The human is proving difficult to dismiss," Vekros admitted. Scifi clenched her jaw. "Strength alone is not enough to stand beside me," she said. "He won a fight, yes, but brute force does not make a true leader. The Ralgen value intelligence, strategy, and wisdom." She turned to her advisors. "If he is truly unworthy, he will fail the next test." Later that evening, Daniel was summoned once again. This time, instead of the training arena, he was led into a grand chamber filled with intricate holographic projections of star systems, battle formations, and trade routes. It was the Empire's war room, where strategies for intergalactic conflicts were created. Scifi stood at the head of the room, regal and composed. "If you expect to be my consort, you must prove your intelligence," she declared. "The Ralgen do not follow fools." Daniel folded his arms. "And how exactly do you plan to test that?" She gestured toward a large holographic display. A simulated battle scenario appeared. A massive Railgen fleet was under attack by a superior enemy force. The odds were against them, and the situation looked hopeless. "Your task," Silara said, "is to find a way for our fleet to survive." Daniel stepped forward, studying the projection. He could hear the soft murmurs of nobles around him, waiting for him to fail. He knew what they were thinking. A human could never outthink a Railgen strategist. But Daniel wasn't just a soldier. He was a strategist himself. He examined the enemy fleet's formation. Their ships were more powerful, but they had one flaw. Their supply lines were exposed. If cut off, their advantage would collapse. He looked at the Railgen fleet's positioning. The traditional strategy would be to engage head-on, but that would lead to destruction. Instead, a feint, making it seem like a retreat while secretly attacking their supply chain, could turn the battle around. Daniel quickly input his plan into the simulation. The holographic display changed as the battle unfolded. The Railgen fleet pulled back, luring the enemy in. Then, a small strike force moved around their blind spot and struck the supply line. The enemy's advance faltered. Their fleet, now vulnerable and without reinforcements, was forced into a defensive position. The Railgen took advantage, delivering a final decisive blow. The simulation ended. The result: victory. A stunned silence filled the room. Silara stared at the display, her mind racing. She had expected him to fail, or at least struggle, but he had solved the problem faster than even some of her own commanders. One of the older generals finally spoke. "That was an impressive strategy." Another noble muttered, "A human did that." Daniel turned to Silara, his expression calm. "Still think I don't belong here?" Silara's fingers curled into fists. She wanted to dismiss this as luck, but she couldn't ignore what she had just seen. The human was proving himself again and again. For the first time, a sliver of doubt crept into her mind. Had the celestial arbiter truly chosen wrong? Or was she the one refusing to see the truth? Princess Silara could not sleep that night. She lay awake in her chamber, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day. First, Daniel Reeve had won against one of her strongest warriors. Then he had outmaneuvered an advanced battle simulation. The nobles were now whispering, and even her own advisors seemed to be reconsidering their doubts about the human. But Silara was still not convinced. She was proud, determined, and bound by tradition. Her entire life, she had been taught that humans were weak, unworthy of standing beside a Railgen royal. Yet now, this single human had shattered her expectations twice. She needed one final test, a test of character. The next morning, Daniel was summoned once again. This time, Silara led him through the palace gardens, away from the watching eyes of nobles and warriors. The air was fresh, and strange alien flowers bloomed around them, glowing faintly under the morning sun. Daniel walked beside her in silence. He had noticed something change in the princess's demeanor. She was no longer as openly hostile as before. Instead, she seemed thoughtful. Finally, she spoke. "You have proven yourself in strength and intelligence, but I still do not trust you." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "So what's next?" "Another test." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Yes," she admitted, "but not a test of combat or strategy." She led him to a small, private chamber in the palace. Inside, a single table stood in the center. On it lay a delicate, ancient artifact, an orb made of shimmering crystal, pulsing with golden light. "This is the heartstone of Railgen," she explained. "It is a sacred relic of my people. It represents honor and truth. If you are truly worthy, you will return it safely to its place in the Temple of Ancestors." Daniel frowned. "That's it? Just carry it to a temple?" Silara's expression darkened. "It is not that simple. The journey is dangerous. The temple lies beyond the city, deep within the wild lands of Tyra Prime. There are beasts, storms, and those who would rather see you fail." Daniel glanced at the orb, then back at her. "And I suppose I have to go alone." Scifi nodded. "Yes." A small smirk crossed Daniel's face. "You really don't want to make this easy for me, do you?" Scifi folded her arms. "The Ralgen do not believe in easy. If you are to stand beside me, you must face hardship. Only then will I know your true nature." Daniel looked at the Heartstone once more. A dangerous mission, alone, with no guarantee of success, sounded like just another day in his life. "All right," he said. "I'll do it." Scifi watched as he picked up the orb. For the first time, she felt something strange deep inside her chest, something she did not want to acknowledge. Was she hoping for him to succeed? Daniel Reeve stepped out of the palace gates, the Heartstone of Ralgen secured in a small satchel strapped across his chest. Ahead of him stretched the vast wildlands of Tyra Prime, a place filled with unknown dangers. Towering alien trees swayed in the wind, their luminescent leaves glowing faintly. Strange sounds echoed from deep within the dense jungle, a reminder that he was not alone. Behind him, Princess Scifi stood on the palace balcony, watching. She had given him this task to test his character, expecting him to fail or turn back. But deep inside, something troubled her. For the first time, she wanted to see him return. Daniel took a deep breath and started walking. The first few hours were uneventful. He moved swiftly, following the ancient pathway that led to the Temple of Ancestors. The map Scifi had provided was stored in his wrist device, guiding him through the winding trails. But he knew it wouldn't stay easy for long. As the sun began to set, the jungle came alive with movement. Strange creatures lurked in the shadows, their glowing eyes watching him. The air grew heavy, and the ground trembled beneath his feet. Then the first challenge came. A Xerian sand beast, a massive reptilian creature with armored scales, slithered onto the path. Its yellow eyes locked onto him, and it let out a low growl. Daniel tightened his grip on his knife. "I don't have time for this," he muttered. The beast lunged. Daniel dodged to the side, rolling across the dirt. He quickly analyzed its movements. It was fast but predictable. Instead of attacking head-on, he waited for the right moment. When the beast struck again, he sidestepped and jammed his knife into the soft spot beneath its jaw. With a final roar, the beast collapsed. Daniel exhaled, pulling his blade free. One down. No idea how many more to go. By midnight, he had made it to the river crossing. The ancient bridge that once stood there was now in ruins, leaving only jagged rocks and a raging current below. "Great," Daniel sighed. "Guess I'm swimming." He secured the Heartstone, took a deep breath, and dived into the water. The current was stronger than he expected, dragging him downstream. He fought against it, pushing toward the shore. But before he could reach land, something grabbed his leg. Daniel barely had time to react as a shadowy creature pulled him underwater. It was a Veclith, a predator of the deep, its tentacle wrapped around his ankle. Panic shot through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He reached for his knife, cutting through the slimy limb. The Veclith shrieked and released him. Daniel kicked upward, breaking through the surface and gasping for air. With his strength fading, he swam toward the shore and pulled himself onto solid ground. Lying on his back, soaked and exhausted, he looked up at the sky. "This test is getting old," he muttered. But as he sat up and checked his satchel, he felt a wave of relief. The Heartstone was still safe. By dawn, the Temple of Ancestors came into view. It stood atop a hill, its ancient pillars glowing faintly in the rising sun. Daniel's legs ached. His body was covered in cuts and bruises, but he kept moving. With the last of his strength, he climbed the steps and entered the temple. At the center of the great hall stood a pedestal, waiting for the Heartstone. He pulled it from the satchel, staring at the golden crystal. "Time to prove her wrong," he whispered. With careful hands, he placed the Heartstone onto the pedestal. The temple trembled as a soft light filled the room. Ancient engravings along the walls glowed with energy, and a deep hum resonated through the air. Then, silence. Daniel stepped back, waiting. Had he passed? Before he could process everything, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and froze. Standing at the entrance was Princess Silara. She had followed him. But why? Silara's expression was unreadable. She took a slow step forward, her silver eyes locked onto his. "You did it," she whispered. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow. "Yeah, no thanks to the monsters trying to kill me." Silara hesitated, then spoke words she never thought she would say. "I was wrong about you." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "So, does this mean you'll marry a human now?" Silara narrowed her eyes, but there was no anger in them. Instead, for the first time, she smiled. "Let's get back to the palace first," she said. "Then we'll talk." Daniel smirked. For the first time, it felt like he had truly won. The journey back to the palace was long, but different from before. This time, Daniel and Princess Silara walked side by side. The jungle that had once felt hostile now seemed calmer. The creatures still watched from the shadows, but none dared to attack. It was as if the completion of the trial had changed something. Even the land itself seemed to acknowledge it. As they neared the grand gates of the palace, Daniel glanced at Silara. She was deep in thought, her silver eyes focused ahead. "You haven't said much since the temple," Daniel said. "What's on your mind?" Silara hesitated for a moment. Then, with a sigh, she looked at him. "You have done what no other has," she said. "Even warriors from my own race failed this trial. Yet you, a human, succeeded." Daniel smirked. "Well, humans are full of surprises." She gave a small smile but quickly turned serious again. "I must speak to my father," she said. "He must know the results of the trial before I make any decisions." Daniel nodded. He knew that the final choice wasn't just hers. It involved the entire kingdom. Inside the royal chamber, King Orven sat on his grand throne, surrounded by noble advisors. The room fell silent as Silara and Daniel stepped inside. Silara knelt before her father. "The trial is complete," she announced. "Daniel Reeve has proven himself worthy." Murmurs filled the chamber. The nobles exchanged glances, some in shock, others in disbelief. King Orven studied Daniel carefully. "You survived the path of ancestors." Daniel shrugged. "Barely. But yeah, I made it." The king's expression remained unreadable. He turned to Silara. "And now, my daughter, you must decide. Will you honor the tradition?" Silence filled the room. Every eye was on her. Daniel held his breath. This was it, the moment she had to choose. Silara looked at Daniel. Her mind was racing. She had sworn she would marry anyone but a human. She had believed humans were weak, unworthy of standing beside her. But now, things were different. She had seen Daniel's courage, his strength, his ability to survive against impossible odds. And most of all, she had seen his heart. Taking a deep breath, she turned back to her father. "I made a mistake," she said. "I judged Daniel before I truly knew him. He is not weak. He is not unworthy. He is—" She hesitated for just a moment. "He is a warrior in his own way." The nobles gasped. King Orven raised an eyebrow. "Does this mean you accept him?" Silara turned to Daniel again. She saw the small, confident smirk on his face, the determination in his eyes. And then she smiled. "Yes," she said, "I accept." A wave of shock passed through the chamber. Some nobles protested, others whispered among themselves. But the king raised his hand, silencing them all. He studied Daniel one last time, then gave a nod. "So be it," he declared. "Daniel Reeve, from this day forth, you shall be the consort of my daughter and the future prince of Thyra Prime." A cheer erupted from some of the younger warriors, while the older nobles shook their heads in disbelief. Daniel let out a slow breath. "Huh, didn't see that coming." Silara chuckled. "Neither did I." Later that night, After the celebrations had begun, Daniel and Celera stood on the balcony overlooking the glowing city. "You know," Daniel said, leaning on the railing, "for someone who swore she'd marry anyone but a human, you changed your mind pretty fast." Celera crossed her arms. "Don't get too confident, Reeve. You still have much to prove." Daniel grinned. "Then I guess I better get started." Celera looked at him, her expression softening. "Perhaps humans are not as bad as I thought." Daniel laughed. "You'll get used to us." As the twin moons of Chiron Prime shone above them, Daniel realized something. This was only the beginning. He had come to this planet as an outsider. Now he was part of something far bigger than himself. And for the first time, the alien princess who once rejected him now stood by his side. The end.